Hello, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural live stream of While the Ghostlight Burns. I'm so glad you're joining us tonight. My name is Sarah. I am the artistic director of R-S Theatrics. If you're not familiar with our company, we are dedicated to producing shows that have never been professionally produced in the St. Louis metro area before, with the goal of introducing new voices and perspectives on issues that are important to our community. Unfortunately, such as 2020, we have not been able to do a whole lot of that recently, but we wanted to make sure you knew that we are still having important conversations and to welcome you into some of those conversations, which is what brings us here tonight to While the Ghostlight Burns. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that continuing to have these conversations and continuing to make sure that we have a theater company to come back to when we are able to go on stage again is unfortunately not something that is free. We have not done anything that has allowed us to sell any tickets this year. And R-S Theatrics has always been a company that is majority sustained by ticket sales. So this year we are particularly needing to rely on our donors. You can follow the link in the chat. If you are on Facebook, if you are watching on our website, you'll see a tab that says Support R-S Theatrics, and you can find the donations from there. And we do have an anonymous donor who would like to match donations from these live streams up to $700. So if you donate now, your donation will effectively be doubled with no extra cost to you. We'll be coming back to that a little later in the broadcast, so that link won't be lost if you don't go there now, but please feel free to go there now, make your donation tax deductible. But now I would like to welcome, with no further ado, our first guest, Adam Flores. Adam is the manager of community engagement and education at St. Louis Shakespeare Festival. You may recognize them as our collaborators on our last live stream, which was part of Shake 20. He is a former associate professor of theater at Fontbonne University, his undergrad alma mater. He also holds an MFA in directing from Baylor University. He was founding resident artist at Mustard Seed Theater, where he directed the community-engaged Bosnian American project, The Dance for Life. He most recently acted in the Thanksgiving play at Repertory Theatre St. Louis. And R-S Theatrics audiences may recognize him from our productions of Jesus Hop the A-Train and the, not sure what I can say on Facebook Live, MOTHERF with the Hat, which he earned a St. Louis Theater Circle Award nomination for Outstanding Actor in Drama for. I'd like you to join me at home in a riotous round of applause for Adam Flores. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Sarah.
How's it going? like it goes right now?
Yeah. I what a time when you initially asked me about this date. I was like, oh yeah, sure. Not really thinking about the eternal pressure that I would be feeling on this evening. But this was a good thing to distract myself and know that I had to get done. Yes,
we hope people can, for this hour, think about something else, something productive, something that makes our world a better place. So you are the manager of community engagement and education at St. Louis Shakespeare Festival, but that's far from the first time that you've been involved in community engagement in the theater world. We talked a little beforehand about the fact that there's a lot out there about why it is good for theaters to be seeking new and diverse audiences, and why it's good for an audience to see themselves reflected on stage. So we're not going to talk so much about those very general topics today. We're going to delve a little more deeply into the specifics. So what I'd like to hear from you first is what your day-to-day job of community engagement looks like. How do you do that work?
Well, so I mean, it's tricky. I've been at the Shakespeare Festival for just over a year and a half, maybe. And much of that time has been spent in quarantine and pandemic, and so there's a little bit of, I don't know. But as far as the community engagement hat goes, there's kind of a few different assets. The Shakespeare Festival St. Louis main stage in the park flagship program of producing a Shakespeare's work for free in Forest Park during the summer. I have very little actually to do with that program. I primarily work with Shakespeare, our Shakespeare in the Streets program, which is going to be producing, fingers crossed, our ninth production of this um, in the Ville neighborhood in North City, September of 2021. Part of that work is bringing artists together and helping them hear stories and collect stories and generate information and knowledge of the community. And that takes on lots of different forms and does lots of different things depending on what the community is and how you're engaging with them, and depending on how that community feels good about reporting out. That can be all sorts of different kinds of things go into that. Right now, we are in the process of collecting stories. That can be done through things like story circles, is where you invite a small handful of a community in and just ask them to tell you stories about the neighborhood or the community that you're talking to. It can involve research into archival work, where have other people collected stories? How can I bring those to the table? And then it's also just meeting people, going out and finding ways that you can be of support. The model that we use at the Shakespeare Festival St. Louis for community engagement was generated by and kind of honed by Cornerstone Theater Company based out of Los Angeles. And part of that model began with them as residents in a community. They went and lived in a community different than their own for a year, 18 months, long periods of time before putting on a play. And so part of that is consistently finding how to recreate that residency in the place that you already live. How do I feel like I'm really engaging with a community that I'm not directly in, but I'm in proximity to? And so that also requires long-term investment. So, we are September 2021. Fingers crossed, we'll be performing in the Ville, and I'm already beginning to work and build relationships to our next community partner in 2022, and planning for like who I think will be our community partner for 2023, so that we can build long-term investment in that community and finding ways to make the relationships and build, because each community requires different relationship building in order to do that. So that's the kind of day-to-day, is thinking on kind of like that three project out way, is being like, what relationships am I needing to tend to today? How do I collect stories? And then all the way out to how am I thinking about 3 years down the way? And then of course, then I wear a hat as producer of that show. So once the show starts happening, it's, rehearsal logistics, it is scheduling logistics, it is audience logistics, it's marketing. It becomes all the normal roles of a producer once we kind of get into show mode. The other piece of that is not in the Cornerstone model, but in the way that this idea of a community engagement person in a large theater company is, I'm an artist from St. Louis. Like, St. Louis is my home base. I've been working here and creating art here for a long time. And so finding ways that we can be engaged with the community that aren't directly related to Shakespeare in the Streets. How can I be thinking about initiatives, and how can I be thinking about ways that we can be plugged into the community writ large in our region, that enhance the work that we do, and also then enhance the communities by providing our resources. So day to day, right now, I get up. Most days I shower and then come sit here at my kitchen table that has become an office space, and just try to email, call people, connect with whatever way that I can, and do a lot of reading and research, and finding all sorts of things to mobilize artists in the community into telling their stories. And then about 7:45, start pouring the whiskey to make it through the next day, somewhere in there.
So, uh, you have been in this role for, you said, about a year and a half.
Mhm.
Was there someone else in this role, or were you stepping into something that was being created to fill a need?
Yeah, Jenny Windsor, who is now the artistic director of the theater program at COCA, was the manager of community engagement and education before taking on some interim roles as Rick Dildine phased out and Tom Ridgely came in. And so that role was created, and Jenny Windsor was the one who kind of held that position. The Shakespeare in the Streets program predated Jenny and her great work, and was started before that when Rick Dildine was the artistic director, and was really shepherded by Nancy Bell, who is a playwright, actor, director, and a professor at SLU here in town. And Nancy was the woman who kind of was given this idea of a program and kind of began fleshing out. And at the beginning, Nancy was working as community engagement manager and producer, but with the hat of playwright on. And so, so that this role has kind of grown out of that. And for timeline's sake too, I was an actor in the very first Shakespeare in the Streets in 2012, which was in Cherokee Street. And that was what really kicked off my love for this community engagement form, was being an actor in that show. And then going away to Baylor and using community engagement as one of my research emphases. That's a horrible, whatever. And so that kind of kicked it. So it's a return back to where I started with the Shakespeare Festival and the Shakespeare in the Streets program.
And then you were also an actor in Blow Winds, which was the one that sort of brought together all of the communities that had previously been part of the Shakespeare in the Streets program.
That's right. Yeah. In 2018, Blow Winds was on the steps of the library. That was meant to kind of bolster all the different communities that had been there and engage with the downtown neighborhood as well, and was an actor in that one. And that was kind of while I was still a professor at Fontbonne, but was helping do a lot of other stuff with the Shakespeare Festival and was growing my involvement with them.
So have you seen, you talked about the communities that you're reaching out to right now as part of the programs that are yet to come for Shakespeare in the Streets. Have you seen a lasting engagement with the communities that you have previously worked with, or maybe not you specifically, but that Shakespeare Festival has worked with?
Are you saying moving forward, or thinking about the programs the communities we'd already touched on?
The communities that you've already been in for Shakespeare in the Streets, how do you see that playing out after you have that show?
Yeah, that's something that I think we have a lot of room to grow in. I think the idea of Cornerstone is that you always like leave something and you continue to engage and return to those communities. Because I wasn't there for a middle chunk of that, I do think some of that kind of like institutional, and there's been turnover, some of that institutional connection has been lost. But I do know that some communities too, we were able to get deeper into than others. The Old North production has really held up and really been someplace that people really find enjoyable and engaging. And so we've been able to hold on to that. Cherokee Street, we still have a lot of strong connections and from that space. I think that the 24/1 Brussels collaboration that we did last year, where we're in two communities, I think we'll also have some longer lasting connections because of just some other institutional knowledge as to that. And I do think that the Ville will be one of our most successful ones with that, because previously Nancy Bell had been the playwright, and Nancy's a fantastic playwright and did a great job bringing this program to where it is. But for this year, we've got Mariah Richardson is writing the play, and Mariah helped out on the Blow Winds and is one of our Confluence playwrights. Very successful, doing a production at COCA just this last week, but went to Sumner High in the Ville when they were in high school. And then Thomasina Clark is going to direct the production, and she's a longtime actor and director here in the community, but also a lifelong resident of the Ville. So now the artistic team is starting to come from those communities as well, and so that will, I think, provide a lot of like real deep connections. That's the hope.
That Brussels production, Love at the River's Edge, that is one of the most unique evenings of theater I've ever experienced. I think that really showed how community engagement can not just benefit because of those relationships, but it can also just create something completely. Without that collaboration, I think it's fair to say you wouldn't have done a show like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The Love on the River's Edge, our last production, was a collaboration with two communities. The 24-1 is what we kind of colloquially called it, which is the 24 small townships that all feed into the one school district there that is Normandy High School, right? And so with Beyond Housing, we worked with their footprint, and Beyond Housing was a great partner there. And so the first half of the show started there on the corner page, and then the second half was in Brussels, Illinois, which is a small, rural, very rural community of I think maybe like 120 people in the city limits. And the audience got on buses and then walked off the buses onto a ferry, and then took the ferry across the river to Illinois and watched the show on the banks of the river at night. And it was gorgeous. But yeah, we would not have. And two, like, that's like meeting the community where the needs are. You have to take a ferry to get to Brussels, right? Like that is a thing that has to happen. And that's not entirely true, but it becomes a much longer drive to do it, right? And so the community kind of said, hey, this is how you get to us. And so then that's what we have to do to make the show happen. I never thought I would be doing a show where I was so aware of ferry schedules and the rules of ferries and like all of the like intricacies of ferry life, but I know them now, right? Because I spent a lot of time on that ferry engaging with that community in that way.
Special skills you never thought you put on your resume.
I'll tell you what.
And I know probably what most people came away from that with was the experience of the ferry and the riverfront and the peach pies. And but I have to say, as someone where I'm sitting right now, I walk for 10 minutes and I'm in 24-1. I go that parking lot that first act happened in. I'm familiar with that, and I've been telling people what the 24-1 is for several years now, and seeing it engaged with like that was very unique and special. Mm-hmm. So the one thing I wanted to touch on is that we hear people talk about the importance of community engagement a lot, and probably most companies aren't going to be doing the sort of productions that are these deeply involved, devised pieces that are starting from the ground up. What you're looking at is probably more like, oh, we have this show to do and it speaks to this community and we want to reach out to that community where we are. Or we are interested in speaking more to this community, so we're going to find a show that does that. But in practice, there's not a whole lot of advice out there beyond things like, well, put in your audition notice that all races and ethnicities are welcome to audition, and that's how you can build your store of actors that are more diverse and inclusive than the ones that you already have. Can we talk for a moment about how, while that is a necessary thing to be welcoming to everybody at your auditions, how that doesn't necessarily play out how people always think it will?
For sure. So I think I would start with there's a general assumption in that timeline that you're framing out, right? And this happens all the time in all sorts of ways. There's a show that a company wants to do, and they need to go find the people to perform and do that show, or they want to build their audience, and so they want to do that. So that is what we call community. That's what we call community engaged theater, or that's what most people agree. That is different than something that is community-based theater. Community-based theater is often going to be something that comes from a community saying, we as this community want to make this thing, and so we are going to like make it happen. You have to acknowledge that with community engagement theater, you are going and offering something to the community. And part of that is that they might tell you they don't want it. And that is really hard for theater artists to like hear and feel sometimes. Is like, but I want to do this show. And that right there, I think, is where people really need to challenge their understanding, is that just because you want to do the show does not mean that the community wants you to do it, right? And that is a real hard pill for us to swallow when it comes to choosing and wanting to do the things that we want to do. That like sometimes it's not our place, And so I, I try to suggest to be thinking about like what is the impetus for the show, who's driving that, and what relationships do I already have as a company or as an artist that make me qualified to tell that story. Why should I, if I'm not part of the community, have a right to help you tell that story, right? And for the Shakespeare in the Streets program, the majority of that has been us as the St. Louis Shakespeare Festival being like, we have a right, and I'm using right a little loosely there, but we have a right because we are your neighbors and because we provide free outdoor entertainment to people that we hope brings lots of people to locations, right? That even the Forest Park show is about bringing people from all over the region into a space to enjoy an evening of watching a show together. And we believe, Rick Dildine proposed that like we can take that on the road and engage with those communities. So really critique, like, why do you want to do this project? Why do I think that I'm qualified to do that? The thing that I say all the time to people though too is, and musical theater people get this, right? Is that like, if you were going to do Hello Dolly, but you don't already have someone in your orbit who can play Dolly, then why are you doing Hello Dolly? Right? Like if you don't, and most of the time we know we're like, oh, we should do Hello Dolly because that will totally, Brenda is going to be great playing Dolly. And so let's do Hello Dolly. And for some reason, when it comes to talking to marginalized people want to like be like, well, we're putting on the show. And even though we don't have anyone perfect in mind, we think that we should get to do it. And that's a really weird disconnect that happens with marginalized people, is that it's just believed that we'll come and do the thing. A great example I think I will give of this, of kind of how I think that this thought process can work out well. I was one of a collection of founding artistic resident artists at Mustard Seed Theater Company here in St. Louis, with Deanna Jen as the artistic director. We did the BOSNIAN American Project, right? But the way that we did that was we said, look, we are a faith-based theater company and we are not finding scripts about the Muslim experience that are really speaking to us right now, right? We're not finding anything that's really leaping out to us that we feel like we can pull off. But Mustard Seed was housed at Fontbonne University, and Fontbonne University is the housing for the Bosnian Memory Project. And Professor Dr. Ben Moore, has built a real relationship and presence in the Bosnian community. So we're like, if we want to we need to like, okay, so we're not going to just tell a Muslim story. Now we found like a story of Muslims in our community, in our space that we can let go and tap into. And we feel like we can be qualified to do that because we already have this partnership with a group that already has a relationship, right? And so we're not just going to the Bosnian community and saying, hey, we've decided we want to do a play that like is about this. And since then we found other great scripts that like we really enjoyed, that complicated. But that was the beginning of that community engagement project, was like, we want to tell more diverse stories. Here's where we already have relationships. Here is where we already feel like we have a foothold. Let's engage with that as a way to then figure out what the project needs to be. And that was not an easy thing. Like that was hard. It was hard to be like, we're this predominantly white run theater institution in a Catholic institute, housed in a Catholic institution. Please come, let us help you tell this story. But once we got in and really got that buy-in, it was incredible to see the support that we got from the Bosnian community. And then the last thing, sorry, I'll just say about this. Yeah, I think that that's the one thing that I think that would save a lot of theater companies a lot of headache, is to just be like, why do you feel like you are specifically prepared to do that show, and what relationships do you already have that make you qualified? And if you really don't have a good answer for those two things, and it's just, well, I want to, then that's going to save you a lot of headaches of being like, you just probably shouldn't put it in your season. It just probably shouldn't be something that you slot yourself for, and then you can go, oh, I need to go build those relationships so that in 3 seasons I can do that, because I've spent 3 years building those relationships and learning the things that I knew, so that I do feel qualified to do this show or to engage with this community in a different way. So that's the long answer to that. But I think choosing the show and why you want to do the show first is so important. People feel like their season announcements are gospel, and they're like, well, we announced it and we said we wanted to do it, so we have to stick to this, even though everything is telling us we're not prepared to do this. Like, it's just not that way.
And yeah, there's too often a sort of if we build it, they will come thought that
Yeah, I just don't believe
a
that.
charity to have these parts available in our season that uh, that people I think need to be really aware of.
Yeah,
It's
100%. And especially when I'm like, if you build it, they will come. But why that it? Why that there are things that you can build that people will come to. It might not be that thing. It might not be that thing. And that's tough. It's hard for theater artists to swallow for some reason. I don't know.
so you with Bosnian American Project and with Shakespeare in the Streets, you are doing a lot of fostering relationships with the artists in that community. You in all of those shows, there are people acting in it that are members of the community who may not be members of the theater community necessarily. Although undoubtedly they have to have some interest if they're going to make that commitment. But there are a lot of times people that you won't have seen on a bunch of stages around St. Louis, people who may not have extensive resumes. They're the people who are telling the stories that whether they're the ones adapting them or not are becoming a part of the show. But you also have people who are just in the audience. I say just, it's obviously an extremely important part, but they're not creating the art. They are taking in that art. And is there a difference in how you approach those two types of engagement, two types of relationships?
Well, maybe, but I would say at the beginning, most likely no, because I'll be honest with you, anytime that we're in a community and I meet someone in that community, I immediately begin to start putting in the idea that I might put them on stage, right? Like that, like if I meet you, I'll be like, and I'll get you up there. What do you want to do? How would you want to perform? Like, do you want to be in it? What do you got? Like, what's your skill? What is the thing that this show needs that you've got? Like, and that's one, because then it means that they start seeing that the show is meant to put them on stage, that they're meant to be the storytellers. They're meant to be, and it might not be their body, but it will be their voice is supposed to be on stage. So I begin by like phrasing it and thinking about like, well, great. Let's get you on stage. What do you want to do? How do you want to perform? So in that sense, I'm kind of hoping that the audience is seeing themselves on stage in some space, right? I'm hoping that they hear the thing that they're thinking or feeling or would say or understand on stage. I would also say with community engaged productions, like particularly community engaged like theater productions, the best thing is when you've written a joke in the show and only the people in the audience from that community laugh, and everyone else who's not from that community has no clue what's going on. Like that is like my favorite thing. And I'm looking for those things that make you feel like you're on the inside, like you got this. And the joy, particularly for marginalized communities, right, is to be like, this is the first time that I'm the one who's on the know, and everyone else around me is not. And two, theater oftentimes is a really unequitable place in that way, right? Like we love telling theater jokes in the theater, and that only serves those people who've been coming to the theater. And I'm not saying that those are all bad. I'm just saying that like it's that thing that we love doing as theater artists where we're like, oh, I got that joke because I've been in a play, and that thing that we do. I want communities to feel that as well. I want the person who's not from Brussels, Illinois to not get why that's so funny, right? I want the non-Bosnians to be like, oh, I don't know what that is. Like, what is that joke, right? Like, I want those things. And so when I'm not so much treating them differently, I'm just kind of like thinking them in different spots. Like I'm thinking them at different places. Like I didn't quite get you on stage, but I got your voice on stage so that you're hearing it back in some sort of way. That's my favorite. My favorite thing is when a joke only lands with the audience it's supposed to. Like there's like that just is such a weirdly empowering thing to feel seen and to feel like someone put you on the inside. And especially if I don't get the joke, I'm like, I don't get it, but they think it's funny. So it's going in the play. Like that's what we're going to do. And then I think that there is a lot of, if you treat the entire thing like we want the community on stage, then the community will feel like the theater at large is welcome for them, right? And I think that that's more what I'm thinking about, is really feeling like if I've gotten the community on stage, then whatever building, whatever venue, whatever space that they're in, they're going to feel welcomed in that space. Because that's the thing that theater does that we love so much. We call it universal, because what we feel like is that we're going to see ourselves on stage. And if we've seen ourselves on stage, then we feel welcome in the seats. But I got to get you on stage first, because there's nothing more uncomfortable than seeing your adversary on stage instead, right? And your adversary being lifted up and being like, oh, they're the ones who are in the know. I'm not welcome in this seat because, you know, this confrontational, negative, harmful person is being portrayed in a positive light, right? It's why, like, yeah, I'm not going to drag anyone on that, but
do you think there are things we need to rethink about the traditional audience experience in terms of who it was built for and the fact that it might not be automatically welcoming to other communities?
I mean, I would challenge the idea that there's even is a traditional like audience relationship, right? Like, I mean, 50 years ago, the kind of like progressive theater didn't even treat audiences the way that the progressive theater does now, right? Like it's constantly prevailing. We act like there's these norms, but those have always been challenged. Like, it's so funny to me that the same people who are like, Shakespeare's the greatest writer that has ever existed would have hated seeing Shakespeare's theater in the time. They would have been like, why will they not stop talking and just sit down and turn off their phones? Like, they would have hated that experience. You know, they would have. So I would say that there aren't traditional norms, but I do think that gearing the whole experience for the audience that you want to feel welcomed, I think that is something that we don't always do a great job of. We don't think about what happens when they walk in the door, other than to be like, we must present we are professional. We must present that we have our stuff together. Like, that is, other than that, there's not really a lot of thought about like, what is their experience and who is this for and will they feel comfortable in this? Because if you have someone specific in mind and you've put them on stage, like, would the characters on stage feel comfortable coming to see that play? You know? And I think that there's a lot of like Broadway, off-Broadway companies that don't do that. Like that want the people on stage, but wouldn't want them in the audience. And that because they haven't created an experience that fits for them.
Yeah. So you touched on this a little bit, but with Mustard Seed in particular, you had the experience of Bosnian American Project, but you also had shows that were a more traditional sort of production. You were starting with a script that was published by someone who's not going to be in the house looking at your production. And, but they were still speaking to a community. Everyone was welcome in the audience, but they were about a particular community. I'm thinking of things like The Good Times Are Killing Me or Crumbs from the Table of Joy. Or so how did that process feel different to you in terms of engaging those communities and seeing them in the house?
Yeah, I think, well, one, Deanna Gent, as the artistic director of Mustard Seed Theater, had spent years in the St. Louis theater community building relationships with a wide range of people. And because Mustard Seed was in a small space, was at a place that was small, had a small lobby, you know, all of these things were intimate, that having a sort of trust that Deanna as a person was a welcome person that artists wanted to come work with, that I can go work with Deanna. And then that community that we built meant that people really, I think, I could be wrong, people really enjoyed working with Mustard Seed Theater. Like, people really felt that the experience and that the welcomingness and the parameters that were set up were successful and felt welcoming. And so if that artist who's portraying that character on stage feels welcome, they are going to bring people in with them, and they are going to want them attached in a way to come along. And truthfully, in a small community like this, like, a big part of it is the biggest marketing you can have is someone really excited about the show that they're in, you know, and especially if it's someone who maybe doesn't always get excited about the things that they do or the shows that they're in or the whatever, right? And then you can see, oh, they're really excited about this one. This one really makes a difference, you know. But just providing a space, I don't, maybe Sarah, I don't think that there's the bifurcation between the audience and the artist, you know, especially if you're wanting you're staged to reflect a community, and you then want that audience to reflect that stage, right? I think that there's really not that much difference in what makes those people comfortable, you know? And we didn't knock it out of the park every time, and I'm sure that there were people who walked away feeling one way or the other. But I think it begins with being like, is the rehearsal hall a place that people feel welcomed? If that's true, that trickles out, that makes a whole lot of difference. If it's the whole process, if the process is part of the aesthetic, then that means that the audience feels like they're part of the larger process and not just consuming something at the end. Maybe I talked myself into that simple answer that could have been one sentence.
No, one thing I always enjoyed about mustard seed shows was the lobby wasn't overwhelming with information, but there was always something really significantly engaging that tied into the production.
Go ahead.
I talk a lot about the production of Kindertransport, I think it was, that had a board that just invited you to write where your family comes from. Mm. And reading the answers from the community and writing my own, that was the first time it really hit me how close I am and how much closer than a lot of people in America I am to the immigrant experience, because my grandmother was an immigrant. And it was just it recontextualized me within the community. But every time, pretty much every time I was at Mustard Seed, I really appreciated that little extra bit of bringing you into the world of the show.
Well, and too, look, Deanna Gent is also, and a lot of the people, you know, Kelly Weber, Michael Sullivan, Gary Wayne Barker, Carmen Russell, Leslie Wobie, Kareem Deems, like all of those people who were at the beginning of Mustard Seed are almost all exclusively teachers, right? And so there is a certain way that as a bunch of, and myself included, like as an educator, no longer a teacher in the classroom, but we kind of understand that like that's part of how you get someone to understand what they're about to engage with. That going in cold and knowing nothing and being expected to catch up with an experience that's probably not your own is jolting and jarring. And so it's better for us to give you something, you know? Yeah.
So you touched on this, and I'll take a moment to say, as we come near the end of the questions that I had thought of ahead of time, that if anyone in the audience has questions to ask, they can leave those in the Facebook chat. I guess you could email us if you're watching on our website. But,
or just text me and Sarah, because if you're watching this, you probably know one of us. So just text us. We'll get it.
Yeah, if you've got access to that, bring it on. So you touched on this a little bit, the situation where a company puts out the audition notice for the show that they've hoped to produce. And then it has BIPOC characters that have to be played by BIPOC people, and no one auditions. Not always sure no one means strictly no one, but you talked a little bit about how to prevent that situation. What if you encounter it anyway? What do you think the best approach from that point is?
You don't do the show. I mean, look, you just don't do the show. And again, I think this goes back to you have to do the work ahead of time. An audition notice is not an invitation into your theater. What that frames this as, and there's a lot of theater companies that think of this way, not just with marginalized performers, but across the board, that there is a scarcity of work as an actor. And I just giving you the chance to be on a stage is enough that should be the only thing I have to do to get your labor, right? Is just an opportunity, and therefore you should give me your labor. And that's a really messed up way to think about it, right? It oftentimes that's the mentality that oftentimes puts performers in hostile situations, in unhealthy situations, because they should just be so grateful that someone is letting them do this thing that they love to do, that everything else be damned, right? And that's just a horrible, horrible mentality. And it provides a sort of, it maintains a hierarchy of power structure that, like, I, as the person who's producing, then have this great power to dole out to whom I deem fit, you know. So that's like that's the part of it. And that too is like why that mentality also is where young people get eaten up in this industry so bad, because you wreck your body early on, you wreck your soul, you wreck your heart early on, because you've been told it's so scarce that anyone will ever let you do this, that you have to bend over backwards. And this is where we get abuse. This is where we get mismanagement. This is where we get all of these things because of that simple mentality. So removing that mentality is also one of the first steps to like getting you into this, that just because you're putting on a play and there's a Latinx short guy with bowed legs and a beard and a bald head, I shouldn't just automatically be jumping out of my skin to do that thing because it's a part for me, right? Like that shouldn't be it. I should like the play. I should want to work with these people, like all of these other things. But there's this scarcity model that it's like, I'm giving you an opportunity, so you be grateful for me, you know? And if I've never wanted to see one of your plays before, you know, if you've never done anything that's programmed, you know, it's that thing, right? You've never wanted me in your audience before. You never programmed anything that get me in your audience. So why would I believe that I would be welcome on your stage? Because it's really a symbiotic relationship. And so, you know, that's what I see a lot too, is I see companies that don't have fervent audience members of that community that they're trying to just like get up on stage finally, you know, it's a disconnect because they see them as separate spaces. How did you what did you program to get me to come see 4 of your shows last season that will then make me want to come audition for you this season? That kind of stuff is what I think a lot of people are missing. And I just think you don't do the show. And two, again, why is your season announcement gospel? Like, I get that there are financial reasons and you paid rights and da-da-da-da. But like, then if it's gospel, you need to spend a lot more time writing that gospel, right? You know, if you're going to hold yourself to it, you better take some time to write it. And you better make sure that if you have this part, you've done the work to make sure you have at least somebody in mind that you can like get into. And there are theater companies that do a really good job of that in this town. Lots of companies have done the work to be like, I'm securing this person before I announce the season, before I do the thing. They made sure they had Dolly before they could say hello, right? Like that's the thing.
It doesn't seem to be an uncommon story among actors from various different marginalized communities that they will get a call after the auditions have wrapped saying, we need someone for X part. Will you do it?
Yeah. And it's also not uncommon, and this has happened to me, and I don't love it, is when you've never called me to be in anything before, but now you've got 6 lines in a play for a Mexican guy, and then you call me, but you've never called me before for anything. No, I'm good.
I'll point out that is a very common reaction that I have heard too. Yeah,
let's just add this to the list of things that I think, look, we've talked about this before. Lots of other smarter people than me have talked about this before, but just so it's all in one location. The other thing is that if you've never cast a BIPOC person in any other role, except for when you need them to be BIPOC, that's also not a good sign either, right? Like, how are you working me into your season because you want to work with me before you have this role that's like perfect for me, right? Like, how are you integrating? And this goes across not just racial divides. This goes across all kinds of marginalization, also like ability, different kinds of gender identities. Like, where have you put me before? Where have I got to be myself on stage before you call me to be specifically this thing and token, right? So again, this is a long game. Theater is a long game, and people just don't treat it like that. Community engagement is a long game, and you have to treat it like that.
Yeah. So if people are looking to expand their audiences just in general. Maybe they don't have a specific community that they want to go after, but they look at their audience and they're not happy with the amount of diversity and inclusion they are seeing. What steps are next?
Well, the first step is wrestling with the question, are you fundamentally willing to change the kind of programming that you do? Like, are you willing to not just do your 5 favorite shows every year, right? Are you willing to really change the type of work that you do? If not, then maybe that's just, you have a segregated theater. Like, maybe that's just what it is, you know? But if you were willing to really challenge and evaluate the kinds of things that you're programming, if you were willing to challenge and evaluate the kind of people you're willing to let have power in your organization, if you're willing to not direct every show, right? If you're willing to let a person of color direct a show, you know, if you're willing to do that, then you can start making those program choices. And the program choices will become very clear to you. You'll start seeing ways, because now you've got a person of color, not just on your stage reciting lines, but making high-level choices by building something, by having power in the way that you think and engage with things. Because I cannot tell you how much, like, all it would have taken would be for there to be a person of color or a woman or a person who identifies differently in any kind of way in the room when you make the decision of how to reach out to that community, that you would make better choices, right? Like, if you just go, hey, we want to increase our audience, let's just pick an August Wilson show and do it in February, right? That's a really poor choice, that having people of color in your sphere go, that's not how we do this anymore, or never was really how we do it, but like, we passed that. Make a different choice to reach out to this community, but you have to empower someone to help you make decisions. And that also is really tough for small spaces. I would also say, though, that this is also to the space where I think we've been talking a lot about, like, in the kind of like the producer world, like that high level theater company world. I also think that this is where young artists of color can take a lot of power, right? If you are a BIPOC person who wants to assert yourself more, you need to go to these people who have these audiences and be like, hey, pay me and I will help you do this, right? Bring me on staff, make me a part of whatever you need to make me, and pay me, and I will help you do this thing, because I have a vision. I have a world that I could do this. Like, taking that agency to do that, as well as young artists of color, make your own company, produce your own things. Like, that is another part of that scarcity mentality we have to get out. You don't have to wait for an old white guy to give you a role in a play. Like, you just don't have to wait for that anymore. There's no reason. And I think that there's lots of companies in town that have embraced that mentality and have really, really grown. I think Slightly Skewed Theater Ensemble does a good job of being like, we want to produce the things that we want to produce because we think it speaks to an audience that's not getting predominantly women, right? That's where they are building voices and doing a great job. And Rachel Tibbetts and Ellie Shwedi do a great job of tapping into, and their Afro Bend Festival taps into young new talent to keep it growing and to keep it moving so that they're in it. And that's great. There can be whatever you're feeling like isn't being said out there, go make it happen. And if you want to use some old white person's money to do it, then go do that. Like, use their money. They got too much.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to have you talk about a few things you have coming up that people can join you for. Let's start with the CKDC Trivia Night.
Yeah, so this is great. So I'm on the board of the Consuming Kinetics Dance Company. I'm not a dancer, and so this is one of those things that I do where I'm like, I don't work in this field, but this is an organization that if I was working in this field, I would feel comfortable in, I feel comfortable going to their shows and whatnot. So I'm on the board for this company. I don't dance. I get nothing from this except for the fact that I think it's a great company. They're, just like everyone else, struggling to make it happen. And there's a virtual trivia night coming up. Would love for people to sign up for that or just donate to Consuming Kinetics Dance Company. They've got a lot of great stuff going on. If you want to be on my team, you can. I might put you through a quiz to make sure you're smart enough to be on my team. But let me know. It's going to be a great time, but just a great company that's not theater that I think is doing a lot of the things that community engagement looks like in a completely different art form. So I totally support that.
And I'll shout out that they are fellow residents at the Kransberg Arts Foundation, along with R-S Theatrics. So,
yep.
Casey. And that you should have a link in the chat on Facebook to get to that trivia night page. Now let's talk next about, find my link. All right, let's do Walking Xmas Carol.
Yeah, so at the St. Louis Shakespeare Festival, we had a lot of success this summer with our late summer night stroll, which is a partnership with a great organization, Painted Black. Also, maybe I'll comment later on and hit up Painted Black, a collection of local Black artists. And we did the big arches that people may have seen in Forest Park, and people walked and there was a play. We're kind of revamping some of that for a holiday experience with our other friends, the Q Brothers, who, if people saw Dress the Part that we did, the guys who wrote that, they do hip-hop adaptations. They also did the Bomany of Errors, if anyone saw that at the Rep many years ago. It's the same writers of that. And they've got a Christmas Carol adaptation that we are going to kind of do audio with, and then teaming up with the Central West End. A lot of those businesses in the Central West End have struggled and been hit, so there's a lot of windows in the Central West End that needs some Christmas holiday cheer. And so we're going to put some stuff in those windows, and that'll be great. And also, too, just the work of the St. Louis Shakespeare Festival and Painted Black pays my bills. And I really think is good and worthy and really good stuff. And working with Painted Black and different, and like employing a bunch of local Black artists and getting them work in this time, I think is really important. So definitely check that out for sure.
And that is free to attend, so you don't need to follow any links to buy stuff. But if you need a link for more information.
And there will be some perks and special things that you can purchase. So know that there might be some things to check out that you might be able to throw a few dollars our way. But in general, you'll be able to see the windows and they're going to look great.
And last thing is Highland Park is here.
So this is if you're interested in community engagement, Cornerstone Theater Company is kind of the founders of this movement, this idea. And I studied with them when I was in graduate school, went out and lived in a tent in Salinas, California for a month, putting on a production with the migrant workers in that community. They are right now working on in the community of Highland Park in LA, which is a great small community that's got a lot of really interesting life to it. And you can check out, I'm acting in a virtual production that they're doing because they needed some more actors. And in the time of Zoom, I don't have to fly all the way out to California to be working with community members from California, which I'm very, very excited about. But you can learn a lot from Cornerstone, but also just this production is a community engaged that's shifted to a virtual model that's worth checking out.
And that one is also free to attend, but you do need to register at the link in the comments.
That's correct, yeah.
Not that they wouldn't mind some donations.
Never.
And speaking of donations,
segue.
We R-S Theatrics would very much appreciate your thoughts during this time as well. We as much as not producing anything in 2020 on stage has hurt our hearts and our souls, it also hurts the pocketbook quite a bit. So we do have that matching donation offer for up to $700 during our live streams. And we have, if you donate at least $20 between now and next week's broadcast, we do have the Adam Flores R-S Theatrics performances package that you could win.
Oh, nice.
And shot glass.
I even set that up with a plug of whiskey. I didn't even know that was a thing, but like I even set it up with a plug that I'll probably start drinking whiskey here in a minute. So wow.
I was thinking more of your last performance, but we can transition it into real life too. So you can follow the link on the chat here, or you can go to our website and follow the Support R-S link. And next week, we will be back here with Shuli Cook. And we're going to be talking about using playwriting to explore marginalized identities. Week after that, we've got Darius Varner talking about mental health in the Black community. And in 3 weeks, Erin Kelly will be talking about using theater to speak to the Indigenous Native experience. So thank you, Adam, for helping us usher this new program in, this wonderful conversation. And I hope.
Are you going to go vote tomorrow? Have you already voted, Sarah?
I have not voted yet. I weighed some pluses and minuses of my polling place, but thank you for reminding me to say, if you haven't already voted, go vote. You can, if you have your mail-in ballot that hasn't been taken in yet, take that with you to the polls, surrender it, vote in person. And if for any reason you are turned away, tell them you want a provisional ballot with a receipt. That is your lawful right to get that provisional ballot.
Yeah, I'm going to get up early and ride my bike over and just see how it goes. We're going to figure this out.
Yes. So next week, we hope we will have wonderful news from that election. And we hope that we were able to, for 56 minutes here, give you something a little different to think about. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we hope to see you back here next week. Thank you, Adam Flores.
Bye. Thank you.